during the next, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, I want to talk with you more than just make a presentation about solid principles. First I'll introduce myself, and then I'll ask you to state your ideas and opinions on those solid principles if you know them already. So this is me, this is my name, Bolboaca. I'm a programmer. I sometimes do trainings and I do coaching, but today I'm gonna talk strictly as a passionate guy about software design. And I don't know if you've ever seen this happening. It's like a cycle. Can you see the text? So it's never fixed, right? You always have this issue on understanding how you can really create quality code. And you always say, okay, now I'm done, but in fact you're not. A couple of days ago, I heard a saying in when I was in a company, and they were saying, you know, who always does things and redone things, they are always very busy because they always redo things. And the main problem of design, basically, of good software design, is how to minimize the cost of change. And this is what I'm going to talk about here. So, what are solid principles? Who knows about solid principles? Who heard about it anyway? Okay, quite a lot. So you could speak instead of me if you want. Are you using them? Yes? Do you understand very well? Do you think you understand very well each one of them, or not necessarily? The history of the solid principles comes with Uncle Bob, who coined this term, solid, because he took some older ideas that other people did, and he created this acronym, SOLID, which sounds really nice, right? And the idea behind solid principles is exactly that you want to have a system which is not rigid, which is easy to change. This, in fact, means a solid system. And he wrote a book, which you can easily find on the web. It's called Principles, Practices, and Patterns of Agile Software Development, or the PPT book, where he describes these concepts in detail. So the solid principles, I have, because I changed the computers, I think I don't have the fonts, so this is why they look so strange. Anyway, the solid principles come from here. We have the single responsibility principle, which basically states that everything should change only for one reason. But again, as Sandra was saying before me, you need to look from the system, from the user's point of view, and not from the programmer's point of view. And this is, in fact, the big difference and probably the biggest challenge for programmers when they look at code, trying to figure out what the user wants. Open close principle says that you shouldn't have a system that is open for change. You should have a system that is closed for change, but it's open for adding new features on it. Probably the most difficult to understand is the Liskov substitution principle, which basically can be translated into design by contract in a simpler way, but it is quite complicated. We'll discuss about it. Interface aggregation principle, the fact that you want to have interface which is thin, clear to understand, and will not need to be changed when you add features. It needs to have a purpose in its own. All the methods there need to be clearly focused on something, on some action. And dependency inversion principle, the fact that you want to have like a core system and they want to have some plugins around it, like injecting them in the system, and you could always inject stuff around that. Like you'd use a plug or an adapter, a VGA adapter. This is what you do. You have the computer and then you plug in the adapter. This is what you want to do with dependency inversion. And now let's see a bit more about how we could understand these topics. So we say that about single responsibility principle that every class should have only one reason to change. But which one do you think is simpler from the two images? So we have two systems. If you're the user of the system, which one is easier to understand? Okay, the remote control. But is it as usable as the other? Yeah, so it depends on the usage, right? Depends on what you want to use it for. So this is why it's very complicated to understand how to put S.O.L.I.D into place. Because probably if I have this in my hand, I'm just doing a presentation, okay, it's simple enough. It's everything I do, I need to use two buttons. But what if I need to type something, text? It would be horribly difficult. So we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the users and to understand how they, what is the use case, in fact, of this system. And this is where S.O.L.I.D comes into place. To understand the types of usages of the system and to apply this acronym, these 5 rules, depending on their usage of the system. The second thing about cluster P is that any class or method should have only one reason to change, right? But only one reason to change means, again, from the point of view of the user. What we are talking about is, in fact, something like this. Let's say you have a payroll system. If you have a payroll system, you need to think about the users of that system. You probably have accountancy, you probably have some users, employees. Maybe you have some, I don't know, CEO or CFO who wants to see reports. They have different types of use cases. So when you think about single responsibility principle, you need to focus on this type of user. So when you write code, or you separate the code in some modules, you need to think, okay, this module here, when will it be likely to change? Like reporting. Well, probably reporting will be used mainly by the CFO and CEO. But what if employees need to use the reporting as well? So you need to make this analysis before digging into, okay, my code is solid. And you always have this balance between how usable the system is and how solid the system is, depending on your context. So we talked about responsibilities, but what is a responsibility in fact? What does it mean? Single responsibility principle. It's in fact the connection from the module to the role. We want to figure out which roles will trigger change to the module. In the moment when we have very big systems, it is very difficult to do that. And this is why we need to understand a lot better the system. And usually for doing that, I use personas. Do you know about this concept, personas? Hands up? Okay, quite a few. So basically what I do is I create If you like a picture with a person who has age, sex, she lives somewhere, it's like a fictional character. And they will put that person there to make sure that I understand their needs with the system, of course. So what would a power user do? Probably you will use some more complicated features, but a beginner won't use them. So I need to figure out how the user, this type of user will interact with my system in order to make sure that my code is easy to change if that type of user needs a change. And in fact, this is responsibility, the connection between the role and or the persona and my modules. So let's see an example. What's wrong with this?
It has responsibilities.
What are the responsibilities? Or 3 or 6?
It do the sales and also it calculates the payments.
Okay. And report the hours. So why is this that? So I'm mixing stuff, right? I'm mixing the getters, the setters, and then there's a method getGravatar which doesn't have a setter. It's probably getting it out from somewhere else, and find by ID it's going again from the database. I don't know. So probably getGravatar and find by ID don't belong here because they might be likely to change, right? What about the tic-tac-toe board? What's wrong with this? So you know tic-tac-toe, right? It's a very simple game. Yeah. Sorry?
Mixing player to the board.
Yeah.
And different levels of abstraction also, right?
Sorry?
Different levels of abstraction.
Yeah, different levels of abstraction, like is empty, move, winner. So these are concepts that are very hard to grasp at the moment. This example is very simple, but when you have a very big code base, how can you understand the levels of abstraction? It is very difficult to go from one to another. So always, if you are in this situation, think about the user. How would the user affect a change in this code? What if the user wants something else? Would it be likely to change? And of course, the manager class. Or if you do PHP, it's something called functions.php. Drop anything you don't know where to put it there. Or if you're doing C#, you're going to have a util class probably. Helper class. That's very, very useful, right? So I found out about some heuristics about when we violate single responsibility principle. Usually, you need to put these particles and or. So if a method is doing too much, probably it needs an and in the name. So I'm doing this and I'm doing that. So the first thing I'm always doing, renaming the method, renaming the interface. I'm making things visible. It's bad, it looks awful, but at least I don't have a problem. And the second step is trying to figure out where those two pieces belong. Will I need to separate them? Do I need to create another layer? Or do they need to be merged in some other layers? All in all, CRP violations have two ways of solving. Usually, you either add a layer or you have too many layers. But that's not, again, very helpful, right? So let's see about open close. This is about brain surgery. It says here, I think you don't see it very well, brain surgery is not necessary when you can go act. This is very famous picture for open close principle. So, you know, if I have this computer here and I want to plug it in, I need to pull out all the screwdriver, pull out all the screws and then solder some wires on top of it. It's the same thing. This is that code. This is a code that doesn't respect S.O.L.I.D, which you need to fiddle out through the code and do stuff around. And basically open close is something like this. You don't have to modify class module to extend a non-core behavior. But again, what's a non-core behavior? That's a very difficult question. Usually a core behavior is the behavior used by most of the user types, most of the personas, but not always. But that's the heuristic that you can use. If you have a system, a module in the system, which is used by everyone, that's the core behavior. So if you want to change how a user interacts with the system, and you need to change the core behavior, then you have a problem with open close and with your design. And probably that part doesn't belong in the core. And you need to add a layer. And you need to drop that into a kind of a module outside the core system. Okay, this does, again, my fonts. The idea is that we have a shape. And the shape extends rectangle, but also we have a circle that extends shape. But we have a problem. And the problem is that if you think about drawing a rectangle with something like 2 dimensions, you don't have that for a circle. We're used to doing stuff like that from the school, right? We are thinking about nouns, we create these objects, and then we say, okay, we'll inherit those. But that's not usually the case. So if you have a shape, and then you have a rectangle and a circle, and the shape will have a draw method, okay, that's fine, but if you have a shape that has some other characteristics which aren't in fact important for all the types of shapes, probably you missed the definition of the abstraction, right? Okay, so how can we extend a module? We basically need to create an interface, and that interface needs to communicate with the core system. And that is what we call a plugin. So we have the core system on which you plug in more and more stuff. So we'll again use dependency inversion principle. Basically, all these stuff are solved in a way or another with dependency inversion principle. So let's pass to Liskov. This was very funny, but I think I cannot change it. So Liskov had this idea, or maybe I could try opening the other slides. it better. Okay, so this is Liskov's substitution principle. I don't know, have you heard about Barbara Liskov? Okay, quite a few. So she's a mathematician, and she stated that into a paper in the 70s. For you, those of you who really understand mathematics, it's probably very simple. But we kind of use this in software design. Because what she's talking about here is mathematical sets, which in a way map to objects and inheritance. So this is more like the software definition. Subtypes must not change in supertype significant behavior. And that's this definition that if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck but needs batteries, you probably have the wrong abstraction. So it's not enough for a duck to walk, right? It has a lot of other features. So again, when you think about an abstraction, you really need to think hard. What is the core part of it? And then another definition of significant behavior is behavior upon client, which clients expressly depend. So as I said, you either use this view of the users who look at the system, or you say, hey, I have other clients, like you have an API or something like that, and you have a lot of clients which will use this. But the main problem with understanding Liskov is that we need to have all these subtypes respect this contract, this interface. And this is, you can see this in two ways. It's either being sure that every method works the same in all the subtypes, or you can see it as a contract. And for example, if we have the class rectangle, what's wrong with it? Nothing?
Width and height is equal to the square.
Yeah, width and height is equal to the square. But look what you're doing with set height. So for a square, you pass set height with height. But with a rectangle, what do you do?
Height and height should be equals.
Sorry?
Height and height should be equals.
I don't understand, sorry.
Height and height should be equals.
Yeah, exactly. So height and width should be equal. But a square isn't exactly a rectangle. Right? A square is a square. It's in fact, if you look at the mathematics, a square doesn't have height and width, it just has one value. So let's think about the contract of the rectangle. What should it do? Yeah, it has two values, height and width. But when you change the width, the height doesn't change. So this is how you need to look at it. And when you change the height, the width doesn't change. this wouldn't happen for in the case when we would say that a square is a rectangle, right? And then we go up to Bertrand Meyer's idea, design by contract. Have you heard about IFO? IFO? So IFO is a language created in the 80s. And for all the methods, you need to create a contract. And the contract means that you have prerequisites, preconditions, postconditions, and invariants. So basically, it's the same thing we've seen for the rectangle, right? The precondition means, hey, these things must be true before. Postcondition, things that must be true after. And the invariant things that don't change. Invariant for a rectangle is width when I change height, and the other way around. And anytime you want to focus on Liskov, think about this. What is the contract of my method? What is the contract of my interface? What is the contract of my API? So this is what we were talking about. For set width has a new value, and the height is invariant. For set height has a new value, but the width is invariant. Let's see about another example. You heard from biology that an ostrich is a bird, right? It is, but it doesn't fly. So from a biological point of view, it is a bird, but it just doesn't know how to fly. So would it be okay to say that any bird would fly? Okay, any bird would eat, but if we think about how biology thinks, for them it's a bird. But if we want to map this to software, it doesn't really fit. So probably we need another layer or something else that we need to plug in, like the flying mechanism, the flying ability of this bird. And we can give it to some of the objects, and some of the objects don't have it. And usually, this is the kind of problem that shows you that you don't respect Liskov. When you need to throw an exception on a method that doesn't really respect the interface. When you see that, it means this is an anti-pattern. This means that you're not respecting Liskov. It's the simplest heuristic. So let's pass to interface segregation principle. No client should be forced to depend on methods it doesn't use. How simple is this image for you? It's like a mixer, we have one as well. Would you be able to understand it? Yeah? Maybe yes, maybe not. But for a specialist, it's basic, right? To know they will know what to do immediately. For someone that never touched a sound mixer, might be extremely difficult to use. So this is an interface, but if you look at it, it has some regions, right? And they are, in fact, this is the interface segregation part, because you have some regions that correspond to some features of this mixer, like bass, volume, and so on. Probably a basic mixer would be just, I don't know, on and off, and that's it. So this is the same example, but for interface segregation principle. And another example without words for database servers. So how does this look like? Do you think that the methods are separated? Is it clear? There is a problem there.
Constantly in a view object.
Yeah. As Johan was saying about levels of abstraction, it doesn't belong there. It's way too concrete. So if you see something like that in your code, probably you're missing a layer. And this layer is an interface. It's clearly an interface. And you need to have several interfaces that either inherit one another or they are just plugging in the system independently. Again, it depends on how much you want to couple your system. If you want to use inheritance of interfaces, that's more coupled. If you just want to plug in independent interfaces, that's less coupled. And the last one, dependency inversion principle. So, would you solder a lamp directly to the electrical wing in a wall? Basically, that's what you're doing if you're calling the database directly. If you don't have a data layer, that's what you're doing. You're soldering the database to your system. When in fact, the database should be a plugin. And you need to be able to change the database from Oracle to MySQL to whatever, or text files if you need. It should be that simple, like plugging in into another socket. It's like taking this computer and plugging it into another socket. That simple. This operation should be that simple. Do you know about Raspberry Pi? Arduino? Okay. So this is an image about the Raspberry Pi. And a Raspberry Pi has a USB port, has a port for powering it. And then in this image you see Arduino, and there's a sensor, and there's a webcam. And what you can do here, you can detach these things easily because you have USB, right? What is USB in fact? It's a generic interface. But it does have a contract, right? But when they built Raspberry Pi, they built it as a core system. And then you can plug in stuff. You can plug in a webcam, you can plug in sensors, you can plug in everything you want. And this is a very good example of dependency inversion. You've put the details outside the system, and then the core system can do basically anything. Well, anything it was supposed to. This is an example about an encryption service. What's wrong with it? Sorry?
File stream.
Yeah. Well, there are other stuff wrong with it, but yeah, that's the most annoying stuff. Basically, what you want to do here is inject file stream, right? Why would an encryption service depend on file stream? It shouldn't. Encryption should be encryption, and shouldn't care about reading content or anything. This is just messy code. So this is how you'll probably be able to change this. So I extracted the encryption part. Okay. And then I can do encryption no matter what.
Just depend on the stream.
Yeah, depend on the stream. So basically this is how it would look like. So that was all my those were all my ideas about solid principles. I think time is up in a way. We have a break now, but if you want to take like 5 minutes question, I'm happy. If not, we can talk during the open space, or we can write some code or refactor some code or anything during the open space. But if you have some questions.
How was the bird example an example of interface segregation? I didn't understand.
Well, if you say that any bird can fly, you are mistaken for the ostrich. So you need to
Liskov substitution.
Well, yeah, but
I understand.
they go hand in hand. To respect Liskov substitution principle, you need to apply interface segregation principle. So you need to segregate the interfaces into two, one with eat and one with fly. Okay, do you have other questions? Okay, thank you very much.